Looks at the situation in North Korea. The rapporteur will take the floor, and I give the floor to Mr. BIELAN for 2 minutes.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much, President. The North Korean regime continues its murderous policy. We're talking about crimes against humanity, and additionally, the state services commit terrorist acts outside North Korea. We must take concrete actions. The last bastion of Stalinism and a symbol of shame on the map of the world should be dismantled, and those guilty should be brought to justice. Now, we must remember that North Korea has nuclear arms and rockets that can carry them, and also finances subversive activities around the world. All this means that we should be concerned, and we are concerned, given that in Europe we can see the return of Soviet imperialism. This is very dangerous. The Korean peninsula has been divided over decades, and both countries are in a state of war. This situation has to change. We must make every effort to protect the citizens of both countries. Peace will be the result of the work of many activists, and a free Korea is a dream of the world.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege BIELAN.
Thank you very much, Mr. BIELAN. And now the floor goes to Mr. PREDA.
Thank you, President. It's difficult to speak in just 2 minutes about the absolute horror of the human rights situation in North Korea. That is why I will confine myself to listing a few facts which speak for themselves. Let me first of all mention that the Phenian regime has at least 4 large concentration camps where there are up to 320,000 political prisoners. To those we should add the regular prisons and other short-term detention facilities, so that the total number of North Korean political detainees is in the hundreds of thousands. The UN Human Rights Commission has likened the horrors committed in those camps with the atrocities committed in the totalitarian camps in Europe in the first half of the 20th century. Only in the last few years, 510 public executions have been documented, but it's most probably that the real numbers are much higher. We all remember the famine episodes which have caused in the 90s between 200,000 and 3 million deaths in North Korea. Starvation is a systematic policy nowadays as well. The North Korean state has arrogated the right to discriminate between those citizens whom can be kept alive and those who must die of starvation. Over more than 200,000 people have been kidnapped from neighboring countries throughout history, especially from Japan and South Korea. Forced abortions and infanticides are normal day-to-day practices, victims of which are first and foremost North Korean women who are forcefully deported from China. Unfortunately, this is the situation of today's North Korea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. PREDA. And now it's Madam Geringer for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. The North Korean authorities have done nothing to improve the situation in the country. This country continues to blatantly breach any international standards, including UN rules. forced abortions, religious-based persecution, etc., etc. This is day-to-day practice in North Korea. Thousands have already died in North Korean camps. The state keeps on spying on its citizens, from professional life to private activities. The North Korean policy is a crime against its nation. What is suggested is international sanctions in cooperation with the International Tribunal for crimes against humanity. We have to guarantee North Koreans' basic human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Gerald. Now 1.5 minutes, Madam SCHAAKE.
Commissioner and colleagues, where to begin in addressing the systematic human rights abuses in North Korea? We can't condemn with enough conviction the extermination, murder, enslavement, torture, imprisonment, rape and sexual assault and forced sex work for women, forced abortions, censorship and effectively the total isolation and systematic repression of the people in North Korea. With all this horror in mind, the prison camps are of specific concern. We support the European External Action Service in following up the Commission of Inquiry's recommendations, specifically in the ICC referral and in seeking punitive sanctions in the UN Security Council. But we should also address Russia and China through human rights dialogues and see what they can do with their influence to improve the situation of the North Koreans. And of course we ask the government and the authorities to begin to respect the basic rights of their own citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam SCHAAKE. Now for 2 minutes, our colleague Mr. HÄFNER.
Herr Präsident, President, ladies and gentlemen. Over the last 20 years, I've been to North Korea quite a few times, and these are some of the experiences of my life which most impressed me, to directly witness such a dictatorship. This Parliament and the UN have appointed a committee of inquiry to North Korea, which has published very clear results of its investigations. They announce that there have been systematic and massive infringements of human rights, and also murder, torture, enslavement, torture, forced abortion, sexual violence, persecution for political, religious, ethical, sexual reasons, forced removal of ethnic groups from their homelands, inhumane punishment, the abduction of third country nationals. Prison camps have been set up, which are as bad as anything we saw in the last century. That is the situation in North Korea. We have to call on the North Korean government to stop all these human rights infringements immediately and to respect human rights. Also, we have to call on Russia and China to rethink their policies towards North Korea. This item must remain on the Commission's and EEAS's agenda, so that the situation in Korea remains on the world agenda. This is my last speech in this Parliament. Let me just say this on this occasion. The state is not there. Well, let me put it the other way around. People are not there for the state. The state is there for the people everywhere. And the dignity of people is what the state should be upholding. I wish for a world in which we have freedom and fraternity, both in Europe, in North Korea, and throughout the rest of the world. And I hope that we can make our contribution to achieving that. And I would like to give my thanks to my colleagues for the work they're going to do in this regard in the future and in future parliaments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. HÄFNER. And now the floor is given to the groups. And I give Mr. Staszny for 1 minute.
Chairman, let me congratulate the authors of this resolution. There is acute need to maintain public pressure on this gross and widespread violators of human rights, many of them constitute crimes against humanity. I therefore welcome the report of the Commission of Inquiry that summarises all these gross breaches of human rights, and doing so informs and educates the broad public. The international community must persuade all relevant actors, including the People's Republic of China, to contribute to drastic reduction of all these violations. PRC has great influence on North Korea and can play an important role in reforming this country. Last but not least, I'd like to see all responsible for these massive crimes against their own people to be brought to justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stasny. And now for 1 minute, Mr. Repo.
Arvoisa puhemies.
President, the UN Committee of Inquiry reached conclusions which set out shocking, systematic, gross violations of human rights and called them crimes against humanity. I think that we need to take the situation in North Korea extremely seriously. I agree with the demand put forward in the resolution, but I'm afraid that these crimes against humanity will continue to be perpetrated. The international community is not in a position, nor does it have the will, to intervene in the sovereign matters of a state. The responsibility to protect has not made any progress, and it's very sad that that is the case.
Thank you, Mr. Repo. Now Ms. Kronberg for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. It's unbelievable how closed authoritarian societies can have control of every aspect of its citizens' lives. Not to talk about the violence or unspeakable atrocities against inmates of prison camps. We were talking before by Morten Messerschmidt of national governments and their responsibilities. The national government of North Korea should, of course, have the responsibility to put an end to extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances and collective punishment. This is not the case, and the international community, the EU, must put on the pressure. In North Korea, all prison camps should be closed, political prisoners released, and the citizens allowed to travel freely, both within and outside the country. We call, and I underline this, the North Korean government to allow free expression and free press freedom for national and international media, as well as uncensored access to the internet for its citizens. We call on the government to invest into living conditions of its people instead of building military arsenal and investing in a nuclear program.
Thank you, Ms. Kronberg. And now for 1.5 minutes, Mr. Griffin.
Mr. President, we all agree that the communist regime in North Korea is an undemocratic shame. What are we to make of a regime that jails its opponents on trumped-up charges and keeps them in prison, even when the political motivation for it is tape-recorded and exposed? What are we to make of a regime that claims to hold free and fair elections, but then arrests its opponents to stop them collecting and delivering the 300,000 signatures they need to stand? If it happened in North Korea, you would rightly condemn it. But the victims in my first example are Greeks, and in my second Italians, because the systematic police repression of Forza Nuova activists has happened there in the last 24 hours. So stop whining about North Korea, as it's totally hypocritical, unless you also stand for the right of European electors to choose Golden Dawn or Forza Nuova if they so wish. You have no power at all to change North Korea, vile though the communist regime there undoubtedly is. But you could order your backyard occupation puppet regimes to restore democracy in Greece and Italy this afternoon. People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. And now Ms. ESSAYAH, 1 minute.
Kiitoksia puhemies. Arvoisa komissaari, YK:n
Thank you very much, President and Commissioner. The war in February led to a situation where there was a report drawn up, and the rapporteur, special rapporteur, brought up a 400-page report where he identified a number of specific crimes against humanity, and that's no surprise to us in the House. But the report also says that there is systematic slavery, rape, sexual violence, executions, extrajudicial executions, and torture, and indeed people being starved to death. The UN Human Rights Council has signed off a resolution, and they are trying to set up a system in order to monitor better the situation in North Korea, in order to ensure they can follow up and track the human rights infringements in North Korea, and also to try and encourage the UN to take appropriate measures in terms of North Korea.
Thank you, Ms. ESSAYAH. And now catch the eye. Mr. RÜBIG, please.
Danke, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. I think it's important for the future that, particularly in countries like North Korea, we should make efforts to establish new contacts, particularly for SMEs, create a new point of contacts there for them. I think the European Union shouldn't just use a policy of carrots and sticks. We should also ensure that there is a balanced relationship between sanctions on the one hand and creating incentives to talk and work with each other once again, and particularly in North Korea, to ensure that prosperity can return.
Thank you, Mr. RÜBIG. And now Mrs. GURMAI.
The systematic violation of human rights in North Korea is not news. Although it is hard to find a country more closed than North Korea, we had already heard numerous testimonies of the atrocities led by the Penguin regime. The results of the investigation led by the UN Commission of Inquiry is, however, a new and important step towards the international recognition of the widespread crime against humanity that is taking place in North Korea. It is crucial because no one will be able to say we didn't know anymore. Now the question is, what can the EU do against a regime that continues to demonstrate its absolute disregard for the human rights and dignity of its own people? I believe that this resolution contains some important proposals, such as the implementation of the UN Committee of Inquiry's recommendations on the agenda of human rights dialogue with third countries, and especially Russia and China. Moreover, supporting the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and maintaining humanitarian aid programmes and channels is paramount. The European Union has to be tough and consistent on this issue and has to speak with one voice. Thank you very much. Your great job, Vice President.
Thank you, Mrs. GURMAI. And our final speech in Catch the Eye, Ms. KORHOLA.
Kiitos, arvoisa puhemies. Olemme vuosikymmeniä olleet.
Thank you, President. Well, for decades now, we have been aware about the situation in North Korea with respect to human rights, and we've not been able to bring about any improvements, nevertheless. Now, a year ago, the United Nations, for the first time, set up a committee of inquiry in order to look into the situation in North Korea. The report was finished in February, and unsurprisingly, we found out that the situation in North Korea is very bad, and the situation there gives us cause for grave concern. The Committee of Inquiry observed torture, forced abortions, and religious and political persecution, amongst many other crimes against humanity. There were also prison camps, and freedom of speech is not allowed in the country. The regime refused to work with the United Nations Committee of Inquiry. What must now happen is that we must react strongly to this report from the Committee of Inquiry. We have to seek to send humanitarian aid into the country somehow and open up and keep dialogue with the regime going. Thank you very much, Ms. KORHOLA. That concludes the Catch the Eye procedure. And now, to wind up the debate, I'd like to give the floor to Commissioner Almunia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, honourable members. the situation of human rights in North Korea is indeed a matter of grave concern for the EU. The UN Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights Situation in North Korea was established in March 2013 following a resolution initiated by the EU and Japan. Since 2003, the European Union and Japan have taken the lead in drawing the attention of the United Nations system to human rights abuses in North Korea. The recent report of the UN Commission of Inquiry was a powerful reminder of the abuses that are being perpetrated there and beyond its borders by these authorities of these countries, including ones that may qualify as crimes against humanity. Our policy towards North Korea is one of critical engagement. The EU's position on the absolute need and obligation that the country change its course in terms of human rights is crystal clear. We have consistently and constantly raised this issue both with the authorities of North Korea and in the international arena. Especially in the United Nations, the EU has taken a leading role in drawing the attention to this appalling state of affairs. And we will continue to do so. We will work with all our partners to ensure an appropriate follow-up of the findings of the Commission of Inquiry. At the same time, the European Union has continued to finance limited humanitarian projects in North Korea that ease the sufferings of the most vulnerable and show to the North Korea authorities that the EU is not just a critical voice, but is an actor ready to help improving the situation directly on the ground. Improvement of human rights in North Korea is our ultimate goal. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you, Commissioner Almunia. That concludes the debate, and we now have 6 resolutions which we shall vote upon immediately. We now start with the vote on the joint resolution from 5 political groups on Pakistan concerning recent cases of persecution. We have to vote on paragraph 5 in the original text. Who's in favour, please? Against? Abstentions? Carried. The resolution as a whole as amended. Those in favour, please. Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Next, resolution on certain vulnerable communities in Syria. We have amendments from 6 groups. All we have to do is vote on the final text, though. Those in favour? Against? Abstentions? That's adopted. And then finally, the draft resolution on the situation in North Korea. Here we have a joint resolution from 5 groups. We now can vote on the entire text. A roll call vote, this one. The vote is open. Have you all voted? The vote is closed. Unanimously adopted.
Wenn es keine Einwände gibt,
if there are no objections, we can now send these resolutions on to the relevant parties and authorities under Article 179 of the Rules of Parliament. We now have to approve the minutes for this session. If there are no objections, the minutes can be adopted. Ladies and gentlemen, point of order, Mr. Posselt. President, I'd like to abuse this point of order in order most sincerely to thank you and your staff for the way you've conducted these Thursday afternoon sessions, and I'd like to say to everybody here, auf Wiedersehen, especially to Astrid Lulling, who will be leaving Parliament at the end of this session. The President, Mr. Posselt, thank you very much. Well, on behalf of the staff you thanked, I'd like to say thank you. That's not the end of the game, however. Mrs. Luling would like to say something, I believe. Another abuse of points of order, I believe.
This is a misuse of the receiver. This is my last speech in the Parliament since 1965. I've been here. I'm not perhaps on the list now, but perhaps I'll come back in 2019. I might stand then. But once again, just to thank everyone, all of my colleagues. We've worked so well together. It's been great fun, and the work's been wonderful. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Ich darf für das
Thank you. Well, I think we should add to the minutes that there was a standing ovation for Mrs. Luling there. Having said that, have a good trip home. Have a vigorous election campaign without too many personal insults, in fact with no personal insults. I think we should all respect one another during the election campaign. Have a happy Easter and above all a good trip home. Thank you. The session is adjourned.